All right, hello again. So in this video, we're going to go over basic inline images. I think you've already seen how to do background images, but it depends on the order that I'm putting these videos in, of course. But we're going to assume that you've done that. You may see it a little bit slightly different if we're doing them in a different order. But this one's about inline images. So this one we have a background image here. This is a background image underneath this text. We're going to do something like this. We're going to make a page, or just put in this image actually into our the ending spot from the background images video. So I've got this image here, and that's called an inline images, or an inline image. Okay, so we're gonna go over the image tag, of course, so you see how to do that. It's different from the background image code. We're gonna go over the source attribute. Let me make this a little bigger because it looks weird. The source attribute, which is the actual file that you're gonna use. We're going to go over the alt attribute, which is required. We'll talk a little bit about sizing an image, how do you make it the right size. And then we're going to actually use floats a little bit on this image, float the image. That makes it go to the right, like that. See how it's on the right and the text is on the left? That's not what it does by default. And then we'll have to talk about clearing floats a little bit and basic responsive images as well, so that when you resize it, it doesn't get bigger than the web page, basically. So you'll see what that means in a bit. So to make the images responsive. Okay, so we are starting with the, in this case, we're starting with the background images file that looks like this actually. And it's just that template file that we did a while back. Hopefully you did it. If you didn't do it, I gave it to you, or something happened where you have something like this, hopefully. And then we've got that background image up there. We're going to add that image into here, basically, is what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to Pixabay, and this is, again, a stock photo website that you can use to download images. You don't want to download the ones at the top because those are sponsored, meaning you got to pay for them. Maybe you do, but you probably don't. So I'm going to use this one right here, which says Technology Computer. And it actually has some CSS or some actually JavaScript in it. So I'm going to click on that. And there it is. I'm going to download it. So what size do I want? I don't think I'm going to need this any bigger than 1280 by 720. I think I said this on a different video, but you want to make sure you get an image that's bigger or big enough so you don't have to resize it up. You can always resize down, but you don't want to resize up. You don't want to scale it up because it's going to lose quality. I mean, it's not terrible, but you just don't want to do it. So I'm going to take this 1280 by 720, and I don't want to do the huge one because I'm not going to need one that big unless I'm doing like a poster or something. So 1280 by 720 is fine, I think. I'm going to download it and show it in the Finder, and I've got a bunch of files here. And this is what it looks like. I'm going to drag that into my image folder. You see I have the Milky Way images in there from before, from our background stuff. But I'm just going to drag it directly in there. And now it's copied over. And now I've got to export it. I want to export it as a different size. So the first thing I did want to remind you is you don't want to use, even though that wasn't very big, that was 12. Let's close this thing. That was 1280 by 720. That's not gigantic, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to send an image that's real big when the user doesn't need it. So what I mean by that is sometimes you'll see people put images on a web page that are gigantic, and they will size them down using HTML or CSS. Then they look okay, but you're actually sending a giant file. So why would you not want to do that? Because it's going to take forever to download, especially on a dial-up or a slow cell connection, right? They're never going to see that image. I've seen people put like 1 and 2, 3 megabyte files on a web page. That's way, way, way too big. So you want to optimize your image. You want to make it as small as possible, and you'll see more about that. But so I don't want to use it just like this. Even though that's not that big, it's 224 kilobytes. That's not terrible. But I don't need it that big, so why send it, right? Why send something bigger than it needs to be? You also don't want to send too small. I could use a small one and then size it up with HTML or CSS, but I don't want to do that because it loses quality usually. So depending on the image, but yeah, I generally don't want to do that. So what I want to do is I want to edit this guy, which we did before, we've done this, I think, before. So I'm going to find that in the Finder, and then I'm going to, oh, that's the wrong one. Oh, that's in Downloads, huh? Let me go back to my folder here. Well, I can do it this way. I'm going to go Reveal in Finder, and then I'm going to, I don't know why that's saying it's in Downloads, but we'll pretend that it's okay. I'm going to open it with Photoshop. There it is, and I'm going to go ahead and clear this, what I had from before, the ratio information. I don't need any of this cropping stuff, actually. I don't even need the crop tool. So I'm just going to go to the move tool, and I'm going to leave it the same shape as I want it. You've already seen, I believe, how to crop to a certain size and shape. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to resize it. So I'm going to go to File and Export, and I'm going to export it as File, Export as, and I'm going to export as a JPEG. Now it could be different files might be better, and you probably will see a different video about exporting or some information about exporting. There's many different file types, but I wanted to keep this a little bit short, so we're going to leave it that way. I'm going to put the quality at about 4. Usually with the JPEG, you can get away with around the middle quality and it looks okay. It is a lossy format, meaning that the quality is going to degrade when you compress it. So if I go down to low and then I zoom in, here's what I mean. I'll show it to you. I don't know if you guys can see that in the video, but it looks kind of chunky and there's like a weird halo, like a spirit aura around this text. If I change it to 7, it gets much better. So this image actually might be okay as a different kind of file, but I'm just going to do it as a JPEG since we just need a quick image here. I'm also going to change the size. So it's 1080 by 720 right now. I'm going to make that half as big. So I can click on here and go to Scale and make it half as big. And that's going to give me 540 by 360, which is fine for our purposes. Yeah, and because I did scale at 50%, it's going to scale well because it likes round numbers like that. And it's going to keep the height and the width the same. What you don't want to do is do something like that. Well, actually, it is locked already, so never mind. Let me go back to 50%. But what I was trying to get you to see is you don't want to change the shape of the image. I'll show you that in a little bit. As far as the height versus the width, which is called the aspect ratio. All right, so I've got 50% in size. I've got a JPEG about mid quality. I'm going to say export. And let me just see what that size is again, 540 by 360. So I'm going to save that in my folder, and I've got to find the right folder here. Hold on a second. I'm going to call this code and 540 by 360. So I just named it code 540 by 360. Remember, I do need that extension on there. So I'm going to say save. And hopefully that is in the folder. Yeah, there it is. So I just went back to the folder and it is in there. So that's the image we're going to use on our web page. So now I'm going to go back to my web page in HTML. I can hide this Photoshop right now. And then I'm going to go and get this out of the way here and make sure that I am previewing the right file, right, by going down and clicking on Go Live. I want to make sure I'm not in the right file. Okay, there we go. So we are good. I'm going to hide this sidebar because it's taking up too much space. I've got this text really big so you guys can read it with your terrible eyes that have been ruined by looking at your phone. So I'm going to hide the sidebar there. And then I'm going to go down to after the hero text, which we did before. Okay, so let's add the image first and just see what happens. So I'm going to go down into the article, and there's a heading right there that says this is an article about how it's cool to code. And I'm going to go right after that and add the image. So I'll just hit a return, and I'll just do img and use Emmet and hit return. And it puts in image or img. Let me zoom in, make sure you guys know this part. img is the tag for an image. Source is the source file for the image. That's the actual image file. and alt is alternative text. So this may be something to talk about just for a second. When you have an image on a page, it's not part, well, I should take that back. It's usually not part of the HTML. It's a separate file. Kind of like a link, right? You link to a new file. When you do navigation or you navigate between your pages, you're linking between files. When you put an image on a page, you are basically linking to the source file for the image. And then the browser downloads that image because it's been called here in your code, and then it renders it on the page with your HTML. So it's not part of the web page. Occasionally it is. Maybe you'll see something in that realm later, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's a separate file. So just like a separate file, we have to put in the path to that separate file. So I'm going to say, remember that I have my image folder, img, and that's where that file is. It's called code 540, something like that, right? So let's get rid of that. I'm going to go in there and say img. As soon as I start typing img for the image folder, I can click on that or just hit return. And there's the image. I can just click on it again, or I can hit return again. And look, the image is on the page. Wow, that was easy. Video over. Oh, you're not that lucky. I'm sorry. But it is on the page. So, whoops, I just grabbed the wrong page here. It is on the page. But look what it's doing. It is sitting on top of this text, and it is it's sitting on top of the text. Let me show you what it does. Let's first put in an alt, and then I'll show you what it does if we move that around a little bit. All right, so I've got image source. I've got the sources, okay. I need to put in an alt attribute. I'm just gonna put code. What the alt attribute is for is to give alternative text to explain what the image is. It's mostly for accessibility. What is accessibility? Accessibility is something that allows what you need to have on your web pages to allow people to access your content. So say someone is blind or vision impaired and they use a screen reader. A screen reader is an app that basically reads the web page to them. If you don't use an alt attribute, at this point in history, before they become self-aware, browsers don't know what image it is, so it won't tell the user what image they're seeing. So it may say image or something like that, but if the user doesn't know what the image is, that doesn't really help, right? So bare bones accessibility, one of the most basic things to do for accessibility is add an alt attribute for your images. That way it'll say like image of code or something like that in the screen reader. When the screen reader basically reads the web page to the person, right? So it's an easy way to help make your pages accessible, and it's kind of required. It's I think on government sites, it's actually kind of a law. I don't think you'll get thrown in jail or anything if you don't do it, but maybe you would go to HTML jail or something like that. I'm not sure. I should probably check on that. All right. So now we've got an alt attribute in there. It doesn't look any different, but that's fine. Okay, so let me just move this. You don't have to do this part. We are after the H2, but I wanted to show you how this acts. So I'm going to click on that and cut it and put it in the middle of this paragraph, just to show you what happens. Some weird stuff. Not really weird, but. All right, so I put it in the middle of that paragraph, and look what it did. It says, there's the words, right? And then there's the image, and then there's more words. So that's why it's called an inline image. Images are inline elements. So the way I think about inline elements is they flow left to right until they run out of space, and then they go to the next line. And it's kind of like text. Well, it is like text. Text is an inline element as well. So if you put an image inside of some text or in the middle of some text, it just acts like a big letter. That's the way I think of it. Or like a big letter in the middle there. So it's almost like that's part of the word, but obviously it's bigger than the text and it's not text, but that helps you kind of figure out like what inline means. It goes along left to right, and then it's there, and then it keeps going until it runs out of space, and it will reflow. It's called flow content with the page. All right, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but that's what inline is. This is not an inline. This is inside of a block, right? So different. All right. So why are we talking about that? Because we want to change how that looks and where it goes and things. So I'm going to first put it back to where it was. Hopefully you didn't mess your page up that way like I just did. All right, so I've got it back here, so at least it's not like sitting in the middle. Well, it kind of is. Oops, did I just... Yeah, I put it in the wrong spot, didn't I? I'm going to revert until I'm doing Command Z or Control Z until it goes back to where it was. I think I messed it up and put it in the wrong spot. So it should be right after the H2. Just Control Z or Command Z, and then I'm back to where I was. So now it's sitting on top of this text because there's a paragraph tag there. That's why it's there. That's why there's a line break there. So that's a good point. You could put a paragraph after the image and it's going to sit above it. But we want to see what it looks like when we put it, when we float it left or right. So that's what we're going to do next. All right. First, let's do two more things. Let's say we want ways you can size the image. I could go in here and I could put a size on it. So I'm going to say height using HTML, right? Height 360. I think that's the height. Yeah. And then width of 540 is what it is, right? So I didn't really change anything. I gave it the same height and width it already had. You notice in HTML, the height and width doesn't have any units. It doesn't have pixels or anything else. The only two units you can use in height and width are percent and pixels. And pixels don't have a unit. If I did this, I'll put percent on there. Now it's gigantic. It's 360% by 540%, which makes it gigantic. So when you use pixels on the height and width attribute, I wanted to point out there's no PX on there like we see in CSS. Okay, so that's fine, right? What did I do that for? You may see code like that where it has a height and a width in it. That is the HTML way to add the height and width. You don't usually do that when you make responsive images, which are images that resize. The problem with doing the height and width like this is if I inspect this and I put it in the mobile view, remember you can click this little guy here and put it in the mobile view. You see that? Oh, that is what we call broken. That image is bigger than the device. I picked a small device, an iPhone SE. So it's too big. Right? So we're going to do some responsive images here at the end, and we will fix that. Another thing I wanted to show you is you do not want to do, let me turn off this. So why would you even put a height and width on it? It does theoretically maybe speed up the rendering of the page a tiny bit because the browser knows how much space to save for the image. That used to be true a few years ago. It might help a tiny bit, but probably not noticeably nowadays. One thing you don't want to do is you don't want to do something like this. You don't want to do like, say you want an image a certain size. And this is especially bad on people. So what I did was I changed the width to 740 instead of 540. And what did it do? It stretched the image. So I've changed the aspect ratio. The aspect ratio is the width by the height, right? So I've changed the shape of the image. It doesn't really bother me a whole lot on this one, but if that was a person, they would be all stretched sideways, right? Or if I do it the other way, let me undo that. I'll do like something like that. Okay, that is distorted, right? I've changed the shape of it. So sometimes people will do that because they want an image a certain size. Don't do that. You want to keep the same ratio. So whatever this ratio is from this number to this number, you want to keep it the same. And what people do, like I said, is they will try to size things using HTML, and that will kind of mess things up. Okay, so that is fine. Let's take this out. I'm just gonna delete it. And let's see how to do this with CSS. So I want to size this with CSS. I'm gonna say, how do I put in some CSS? Oh yeah, I can use a class. Remember that from a while back. I'm gonna give it a class of image1. So I gave that a class. It's not doing anything yet because we don't have any image1 text yet. but we will in a second. So it didn't do anything. I'm going to go up here to my code now. So I'll make sure that you have this right. We have image source equals, and we've got the code image in there. You can use a different image if you want. I forgot to say that. Just make sure you size it. And it doesn't even have to be that exact size, but it might help a little bit. And then we've got code, alt equals code. That's just a description. That depends what your image is. And then I've got class equals image1. So now I'm going to go up here to my styles and start adding some styles. I'm going to go below hero text, which we already had. And I'm going to say dot image1, because that's the name of our class, right? So remember when you define a class, it starts with dot or period. So you apply it by saying class equals image1, and you define it or describe it with the dot or the period, if you want to get, say it that way. So I could put height in here. I can say height of 800 pixels. And this is where you do have to say pixels. Now it's 800 pixels wide. So it changed the size. And then I would probably put width auto, just to make sure that it doesn't change the aspect ratio. Again, what I don't want to do is something like that. Now I did height of 800 and width of 200. That is not the shape of that image. That is very distorted and you can't even read it anymore. Not that that's usually what you do with those, but I don't want to do that. So I want to put auto there. What that means is when I put auto, it will automatically calculate the correct size. It kind of does it anyway, but I'm just putting it in there so you guys see that. All right. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to actually comment that out. I'm going to leave it in, but comment it out so that you guys have it. So I took that off. Now it's back to its actual regular old size. I'm going to say float right. I don't know why left came up in there. I'm going to say right. What does that do? It did something. What did it do? Oh, check that out. So it went to the right. So when you float something, and this is kind of what floats were designed for, you may see some ancient material in the class that I just left up as sort of a historical record. Floats used to be used to make columns. This is kind of a column. Well, it is a column, right? Here's a column and here's a column, right? So what people did was they used floats to make columns. That's not what they were made for. And even though we all did that for like 10 years, that's not what they were made for. But there was no other way to make, not a good way to make columns. This is actually after tables and before Flexbox and CSS Grid. So a little history of floats. But they are fine to use for this because that's kind of what they're designed for. So what happens when you use floats, what happens? I float to the right, the text flows around. So it takes the image out of what's called the normal flow and it goes to the right and the text wraps around it, just like it would in like a fancy page layout program like InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop, something like that. So that's cool, right? It wraps around and it doesn't have that weird like space on the sides anymore, like it's a big letter. It wraps around, which is great. That's kind of what it's good for. I can say float right or I can say float left. If I say float left, obviously it goes to the left and it wraps around, the text wraps around to the right. Now it's super close to the edge here. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, there is no float center. If you want to center an image, you can't float it to the center. There is no float center. It does not exist. People want it to exist. It does not exist. So if you want to center an image, you can use actually text align center. I'll even show you that. Since we're talking about it, let's go text align center. And I think it'll work in this case. Well, actually it didn't because it's already kind of centered because it's outside of a paragraph. Let's ignore that. Pretend I didn't do that. I want to do float center. Yeah, we don't need to know that part right now. So I did float right. This text is a little bit close right there. A little bit too close. It's cramping my style, man. Don't cramp my style. So I want that a little bit of space there. So I'm going to add a little bit of margin on the left. Remember, margin is space away from something or space between things, I guess you could say. I'm going to say margin left of 1 EM, which will be about 16 pixels or so. I said margin. So that made this little space right here. There's now a one letter with basically 16 pixels between there. So it's not cramped. It's a small thing, but it's kind of a big thing. You want to have your elements have space to breathe. If I did just margin, it would be on all sides, and then I would push the image away from the edge, and it wouldn't line up with the edge of my stuff, so I don't want to do that. So that's why I did margin left. Okay, that is good. So we still have a couple of problems. Not big problems, small problems, not like your taxes are overdue, not that kind of problem, but we have a couple of problems. First is this image still, you can see one problem, but we'll come back to that one. If I inspect and I go to the mobile view, I still have that problem. So I floated it to the right, so it is stuck on the right, but the image is actually cropped. It's leaking out here. You can't see it here on this version, on this view, but it's cropped, right? I'm not seeing the whole image. I want this image to scale with my page. That's what I want. So how can we do that? So this is just a little bit of responsive design. Responsive design means design that responds to different conditions. Usually it's the width of the browser, but it can be other things as well. So I'm going to go to down here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to add some CSS. I'm going to say image, and that's going to apply to all images. And I'm going to say max width 100%. And I'm going to add a height of auto. So what's that going to do? Max width we've seen before, I think, right? What does that mean? So now if I resize this page, check it out. I can't really see it that much on that view. Let me go to the mobile view. Hey, look at that. The image now fits in the mobile view. It scales with the mobile view, or with the view in general, not just the mobile view. So I don't know if you could see it very well because it was kind of almost too not big enough to see, but yeah, it is scaling. See how it's scaling right there? So when you say max width 100%, that's telling the browser, I don't want this image to be bigger than 100% of what? Its container. What's its container? Its container is whatever it's inside of, which is the article in this case. Yeah, this is the container of the article, which is inside the main, which is inside the wrapper, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens is the image will scale now. That is a super basic way to do responsive images. All right, so that is most of it. The only other thing that we want to talk about in this video is this little problem. So when you float things, oh, I forgot to tell you guys, you need to delete the last two. Well, if you don't see this problem here, you can delete a couple of paragraphs. So I'm going to go down here and delete a couple paragraphs because you're like, there's nothing wrong. Mine's not leaking out of the bottom. Now, if I deleted a couple of paragraphs, I deleted the last two paragraphs. You can see that that image is leaking. I call it leaking. That's not a technical term, but it's leaking out of the bottom of my whole layout. Here's my footer. It's actually past the footer. That is a common thing with floats, which you probably do not want. That does not look right, correct? It's okay. I mean, it doesn't do it when it's narrow and the content, the text is long enough to get past the image. But if you get something like this, then you got problems, right? So how do we fix that? There's a couple ways to do it. And this comes from the ancient days of floats. So I'm going to go in here and say, I'm going to do it two different ways. So I have this article, right? That's the container for the for this whole thing. This is the article here. And I want to contain, it's called containing floats. Sounds like a lifestyle movie or something, or Lifetime movie. So I'm going to put in article, and I'm going to say overflow. This is one technique. I'm going to show you two. I'm going to say overflow hidden, And what happened? Does it work now? Yeah. So overflow is a CSS property that says how overflow, if something overflows, meaning it's too big for the container, how it is handled. So overflow hidden doesn't really make a lot of sense in your brain this way. Like, it's not hidden, but it ends up making the article contain the floats. And what does that mean? That means now the article sees the float again. By default, when you have something that's floated, it's out of the normal flow. So the way I think about it is this footer is not really seeing this image anymore. It doesn't care. It just sees this, right? Because it's out of the normal flow because I floated it. I know this sounds like a foreign language. It kind of is. But if I put overflow hidden, now the footer or the article does see the floated element and it pushes everything down. So it contains it. That is one way to do it. I'm not going to get more into that because floats are kind of not used as much as they used to be. Used to be we would spend 2 days on this kind of stuff because that's how you did layout. But you don't usually use floats too much for layout anymore, so it's not worth spending the time on. But I will show you one more way to do this. So I'm going to comment that out. So it turns it off, right? So now we got the float leaking out issue again. Another way to do it besides using overflow hidden on the container is to use a clear on the following element. So if I look down here, here's the article, and then it's inside a main, right? And then there's a footer down there, right? We know the footer is right there. So what I can do is I can go down here and I can say footer, and I can say clear both. That has a similar effect. So what does that mean? When you say footer clear both, the way I think of that is to say it in English is you're telling the footer to look for clear left and right margins. So since there was an image in the way, it pushes the footer down until it has a clear left margin. That means there's nothing next to it, and a clear right margin. There's nothing next to it on this side. If I said clear, I could say clear left, which actually is a company name back in the day. It doesn't work because it has a clear left margin. The left side is clear. It's all the way to the edge of the container. But if I said clear right, it would work because the right edge was running into that image. And so now it goes, well, I got to go down here to find a clear right margin, and it goes down. If you say both, it looks for both sides. So it doesn't matter which side was floated. Yeah, I think that is it. Sorry, that was kind of a lot just for putting a silly image on a page, but I wanted to show you about sizing, talk a little bit about how you don't want to change the shape of an image. So don't change the shape of it. You can always crop it to whatever size you need, but you don't want to use HTML or CSS to change the shape. You can change the size. I could make this slightly smaller if I wanted to. Doing the technique up here that we did, I could say width of 100 or something, or 200 instead of 400, something like that. But then again, I'm sending an image that's too big, so I don't want to do that. File size wise. All right, I think that's it. Let me make sure that we covered everything. So we talked about the source attribute, the alt attribute. You do need to add an alt attribute. If you don't, by the way, it will show up as an error in the validator. And remember, I'm not doing it in all these videos, but you should be checking these files in the validator. I showed you how to size it using height and width in HTML. Don't change the ratios. That's a good t-shirt. I showed you how to float an image and clear the float and basic responsive images. All right, that was good. I think that was good. What do you guys think? All right, I'll talk to you guys again later.